What's up, everybody? Buckle in for your Wednesday night edition of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast brought to you, as always, by Tops Friendly Markets. Enter for a chance to win $1 million right now. Kings Hawaiian is pitting two city sliders against each other every week in the ultimate showdown, and you get to help decide the winner. Vote weekly for your favorite regional slider for a chance to win all season long and earn entries toward the $1 million prize. Explore the interactive stadium to play games, get recipes, share photos, and more. Visit topsmarkets.com/redzone to enter. And there's been a lot of questions about what will the Bills do? What won't they do? What can they do? And we thought, Ryan Talbot and myself, let's bring on from Spotrac.com, Mike Ginnitti, to figure it all out. Mike, we've done this now. This will be our third off-season edition of this episode, kind of like a salary cap free agency primer. And we're really grateful for you taking some time to do it.
My pleasure, guys. It's a big off-season for the Bills, so there's plenty to talk about.
There is plenty to talk about. I sent you a couple questions that we wanted to kind of get into, but I think, the best place to start here is, the Bills are sitting at about roughly $20 million over the salary cap limit. And there's obviously a bunch of levers at Brandon Beane's disposal that we can kind of get into over the course of the episode. But I think obviously the most, the easiest one right off the top is the restructure, right? Like the base salary, figure it out. There's probably three prime candidates. And I wonder, in your eyes, Josh Allen seems like a slam dunk. He's in the picture long term. We've talked a little bit about that over the last couple of weeks. What do you think is the most dangerous restructure? I'll throw Allen into the pot, but between him, Stefon Diggs, Von Miller, what do you think could be a restructure that Beane might consider that might have some dangerous parts to it?
Yeah, there's a few candidates for that for sure. Part of me wants to say it's Von Miller because he signed at such a high contract. It's at a high age and then got injured, right? It sort of played out exactly like a lot of people thought it was going to. But I still think his roster bonus, I think it's $13 million-ish. That has to be converted. The Bills just need that kind of room right now. I think Diggs is the answer. I think you're going to have to alternate some of these superstar restructures, kind of staggering them out year to year. It's a good year to do it with Josh. As you mentioned, you can free over $20 million just, basically with base salary. And the Diggs conversation isn't that I don't want him here 3 more years. A 2 to 3 is probably about right based on his age. But also, and I hate to say this, it's one of those positions you can kind of flip, right? We're seeing 5 or 6 every draft, first through third rounds, really hit hard, immediate impact. And we're starting to see, if we get ourselves away from last offseason, which was insane with the free agency and trades and things like that from a wide receiver standpoint, you're still allowing yourself to have 3 to 4 really strong options every free agency if you have the space, the cash to go and get somebody like that. So I'm not saying he's replaceable because I don't think right now he is, but you want to take care of 3 years from now Stefon Diggs' contract from a dead cap perspective because you still will have Josh at high numbers at that point in time. There's a lot of defensive players that have to get turned over in the course of that time. So he's probably the name that I stick away from this year. Not because I want him gone, just because, like I said, you got to stagger these things right now.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And Mike, I talk about this a lot with people, whether it's radio, whether it's just casual Bills fans. What's the easiest way to explain to fans how restructuring works in terms of how the money works down the line? When I try to explain it, sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. Since you're the expert at it, how would you explain these restructures? For example, Josh Allen with the $20 million.
Yeah, so Josh has a real high base salary this year, right? And it's $27.5 million. The minimum salary that Josh can play on this year is a little bit over $1 million. Mm-hmm. So if you do the math, you subtract 27.5 down to 1 million, right? And whatever you're left with, you can make that a signing bonus, pay it to him right now, take that and spread it over 5 years of his contract, which means 4/5 of that 27.5 million, right, is now saved in 2023. That's no longer cap in 2023, but 1/4 of it is added to 2024, 25, 26, 27, 28, right? So you're implementing basically a $4 million increase on every cap hit going forward for the next 5 seasons to take a little bit of a break this year. That's really what it is. It's a base salary or a roster bonus that gets converted into a signing bonus. There's no less cash. The player actually gets the cash in hand at the conversion, but the cap gets spread out over 5 seasons, and better now, much, much worse over the next 4 years.
So if you take a quick snapshot of the Bills salary cap picture, and you could do that if you go over to Spotrac.com, pull up the Bills page, you can kind of take a look player by player, what the contract, what the cap looks like, how long it goes on for, and how that all figures out with the top 51 contracts. The Bills have, I believe, 9 contracts on the books for 2023 with a cap hit of $10 million or more in 2023. How does that stack up across the league? It seems kind of high.
Yeah, top third, maybe, probably not top 10. There's honestly quite a few teams in this boat right now. There's been, major quarterback contracts to half the league, 5 more happening in the next couple of weeks here. And then most teams are locking in a wide receiver. Most teams have locked in an edge rusher or a cornerback or both. So the Bills are kind of status quo for the contenders. San Francisco is going to have 9 or 10 when it's all said and done here in the next couple of weeks. So again, I've said this a couple times now. Minus 20 or minus 18, wherever they sit right now, is not a daunting task for many of these teams that are all in, like the Bills have been over the past 2 off seasons, keeping their own players, making big free agent splashes. I think they're in a pretty good spot. There's 3 or 4 contracts you flip over right now to get healthy. And then it's about, are you going to let a few guys go? How can you pay your draft class, which is the last resort, right? That's July. And then what are you bringing in from a free agent perspective? How much are you going to need there? And how is it going to impact 2024 when there's more decisions to be made? Because this is not just a 2-month process. Brandon Beane has to think about really 3 more years of Josh Allen's contract / contention window here.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, obviously the Bills are going to have to make some moves to get under the cap, but also to be able to make some moves this offseason. If the Bills were to prioritize a position to spend on, whether it's wide receiver, defensive line, safety, or offensive line, which one typically gives the team the best returns in terms of the effect on the cap versus the production and impact they get?
That's a great way to phrase that question. You can get ugly fast overpaying for a defensive tackle. Let's put it that way. And the Bills are going to find out about that with Ed Oliver's 5th-year option, I think. I think the best return on investment right now in the league, and it still isn't really breaking too many banks. There's certain guys in the 18s and the 20s right now, but that interior offensive line has become more and more impactful because of the quick release quarterback, because of the spread offense, because of the gadget running backs in the league. Just because of where things are going from an offensive standpoint. I just had a Bears conversation not too long ago, and that's all I kept saying. They were talking about what kind of wide receivers can we load up on, and what about cornerbacks? And I was like, and if you can't keep Justin Fields off the ground 55 times, right, again, you're going nowhere. So I'd say that quite a bit with the Bills and Allen. I think the guard center situation is a major concern, and I don't think you have to break the bank. There's some decent free agent guards, Ben Powers, some free agent centers out there, Ethan Pochich. I think the Bills, because of who they are, because of what they represent now in the AFC, are going to be attractive to any of these major free agents and or trade markets. And I think I'd start there. I think the interior offensive line is where it's boring, and that's not going to, drive clicks or get fans, ramped up here. But I think when you're talking about protecting Josh Allen and getting this offense back on track, that's probably step 1 for me.
I want to dive into Ed Oliver, but before we do, let's stay on the offensive line because Mitch Morse specifically is such an intriguing option this offseason. What do the Bills do with him? I guess to start with, what are your thoughts on his value in the offense versus what he's making? Of course, he's got that continuity with, Josh Allen. He knows the offense. He's been with Ken Dorsey all these years, even when he was the quarterback's coach, and it was Brian Dable's system. You look around the league at some of the approaches. I really like the way the Eagles did it with Kelsey under contract. They go out and they draft Landon Dickerson, who could play at left guard, and then maybe flip him over to center when Jason Kelsey retires. Maybe that's kind of an option, and that might require you to get creative with what you do with Mitch Morse. What are the options from straight out releasing him, which comes with, some cap savings this year, to what a potential restructure would look like and how many years out you have to go?
This is the second straight off season that I've put him on the bubble. And it's just because the contracts that he's been signing are restructured or taking pay cuts like he did a couple of years ago. It looks like a situation where the Bills could free up enough cap to make it worth their time. Every time I mention Mitch Morse's name as a roster bubble candidate, and this is rare, I don't get this happen often, I get yelled at by Bills players, right? I get yelled at left and right. This is not a guy that we can afford to lose, whether it's because of the relationship with Josh, whether it's because of the way he captains that offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. And I get it. And I'm in no position to argue that point. So I know that I'm treading delicately when I put a player like this on the cutting block. And you're right. There are other ways to go about this. The Kelsey example is a really good one because it's Howie Roseman being his creative cap gymnastics self, right? We're going to give this guy $11 million. It's going to look like 3 from a cap perspective. There's going to be a ton of void years. We're going to build in some guaranteed money into next season, even though we think he's going to retire, but we're going to put it there just to incentivize him to stay because that's how important he is. So that contract is just like the ultimate. This is how much this guy means to us, even though we can't pay him a lot and we really don't want him to go anywhere else. So there's that. If Mitch Morse really is that kind of player to the Bills offense from a whole, from the intangible side of things, there's always ways around this. And to me, it would start with, let's rip up this current contract. Let's grab that $6 million right now, at least for March 15th, so that we have that in our wheelhouse. And then let's put something creative like that out there to make sure that it's year to year, that it's cap friendly up front, but that this guy's in the fold and we don't start, having riots inside that locker room.
So you hear it from Bills players, but obviously Aaron Kromer was in his first year as the offensive line coach this past season in his second stint with Buffalo. But if Kromer goes to Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane and says, maybe this isn't the type of center that I want for my offensive line, does that maybe incentivize the Bills to move on from Morse more so than anything else?
Of course. Yeah. Look, there's going to be a lot smarter people out there saying the right things. And to your point about, drafting somebody to eventually take over, I get the sense that Ryan Bates is already that guy. I mean, I think Ryan Bates is more comfortable under center than he is in the guard position. And I think his production has shown that. So that's another reason I had him on the block, Mitch Morse, is I think you could address the center position internally, go out and sign a Ben Powers, draft a guard, late in the first round or in the second round, and really start to flip this thing over properly, which is, as we've seen with Kansas City and Cincinnati, the only way to do this. You have to take care of this first, and everything else kind of falls into place.
I was thinking about what would be an example of the Ed Oliver situation. And there's not a real clean one because there's so many different situations over the years where people move off of, big draft picks. I mean, I was thinking about Orlando Brown. He was a 3rd round pick, didn't have a 5th year option. He doesn't really work, but the Baltimore Ravens got out in front of that. They realized that they weren't going to pay him. And so they traded him away. And so, you wrote up on .com that with Oliver, there is a path to getting that 10 million plus for this year off the books and not having to even make that decision by maybe potentially trading him. What does a long-term extension look like? Because that's something that we're going to talk even after it eventually happens, if it does, because whether or not he's worth it as a guy that when Von Miller went out of the lineup, it's almost like, his production for the most part dropped off with that. And he's a former top 10 pick.
Yeah, the draft is a big part of this, and I don't like that it is, but it still is. It's still something that agents look at, that teams eventually have to give in for and say, look, this guy was drafted there for a reason. You have to pay him as if he's going to have that kind of ceiling seal, even though I agree with you. I think when he was asked to do more, right, when the line got depleted a little bit, I think that really stretched him too thin to the point where I think the run defense just completely went out the door, as I'm sure you saw. You were at the same games I was at, I'm sure, right? Mm-hmm. The center of that defense was just the parting sea. So, look, to me, this is a situation where if the Bills don't think this is as dramatic a problem as maybe some of us do on the outside, you can live with it. You can also add 4 void years and restructure this thing and make it a low cap hit this year and then take on dead cap next year. That's also possible. We've seen the Saints do that twice with 5th year options. I think this is one of those scenarios, and draft capital is big and it's important, but if you get one of those comp picks sitting out there that you can trade, you package it with half of this 5th year option and you take on some of this as signing bonus, and you find a partner for this, and you do it before the draft, and you make it happen. Not so much for cap savings, but for football purposes, so that you can, draft his replacement and or sign his replacement in March. But I think any way possible, I'd be considering this 5th year option a problem on this salary cap right now.
Yeah, and I guess this is a good transition here for Brandon Beane. In addition to Ed Oliver, it could be Ed Oliver again. Is there anything that he's done contract-wise that, looking back, he maybe wishes he hadn't done?
It's a nice point. I struggle to say this because I love everything about this guy on and off, but the Dawson Knox contract has to be at least a consideration right now. It's not the biggest deal, right? It's not the biggest tight end deal in the world. I think it's 5th or 6th right now. But the usage just went out the door, whether that's a scheme change, whether that's he was really banged up and they really didn't think they could use him. to the max. But I'm a little concerned that one's going to come and go without having much impact. Other than that, the Nyheim Hines trade based on the contract, not even having Indy take on some of that contract, that one seems a little strange. And I feel like he's a cut candidate right now, which makes it even more strange when you think about the assets that were given up. But other than that, guys, no. I think matching the Bates contract based on the conversation we've had was smart. I think the Morse restructures the past couple of years have been smart. Those cap hits haven't hurt this team at all. Right. Milano is $4 or $5 million undervalued. He was the second he signed that contract. He proved it again this season. Mm-hmm. So that's a phenomenal contract. I'm not going to sit here and destroy the Tre'Davious contract yet, because obviously the injury was awful. And there are just some people that don't fully come back from that kind of injury. So it's unfortunate that the timing worked out. You paid him when you did, and then that happened. But I thought when they paid him that contract, it was under market, and the guarantee structure was less than he could have gotten on a lesser team. So I think that everything's been right on par. I've said this quite a bit. His decision, his mindsets are, to me, with value in mind, but understanding that you have to go north of things every now and then to keep a strong roster assembled. So I don't have any problems right now with this active roster, including the Josh Allen contract, which I think, when he's back to normal and fully healthy next year, is going to make everybody else's look pretty small.
Yeah. And like we mentioned the asking you about the bad contracts, right? But I feel like you mentioned Milano's as like one of those diamonds in the rough. I mean, you if you could, hope for one on either side of the ball, I don't know if you could dream one up as good as that one looks. But I think that brings up a bigger question now as we kind of look at the Tremaine Edmunds situation. And also past this year with his contract now, Milano's coming up. From your perspective, with what you've seen of the two players, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd probably keep them together because offensive coordinators talk so much about the challenges playing this defense because you have to account for their coverage ability. And that's only going to get probably better, you figure. Although you're also going to probably deal with more missed games at some point. They've been pretty healthy for the last couple of years. So you got to factor that in. How do you approach this thing? Of course, the Edmunds question, but is there a Milano extension somewhere possible? Are you starting to look about that long term, or are you scared off by his age and where he's going to be at the end of the contract?
No chance about that. And in fact, I thought we'd be in a worse spot with his injury situation based on his size and where he was coming from a draft perspective and all that. No, he's one of the best value contracts in all of football. So I'm keeping him in this thing until he screams to get out of it. Right? I'm not touching this thing. There's probably another restructure here this year with the base salary. And then we'll talk about it after this year. Maybe even not. Maybe we're running to the wire again with him. But just to kind of combine two conversations here, the fact that you have Milano at, basically $10.5 million, and yes, that's 2 years old. So you got to adjust for cap a little bit here. But the fact that happened, and by the way, that happened at the last second, right? This thing went right down to the start of the league year. And it was announced right before that 4 p.m. Eastern, basically, that Milano had extended to stay off the market. But you didn't have to overpay to keep him. And I think I had him at about 12 and a half. And he came in millions less than that. And Brandon Beane got the contract he wanted at the end of the day. This is why the conversation with Tremaine Edmunds at 18 million can't happen. It can't happen. If you're thinking Bills plus Tremaine Edmunds staying, we have the exact example of a player who honestly might have more value in Matt Milano than Tremaine Edmunds does, on any given week. And he already put in the template for how this is going to work if you're going to stay in this current contention window. So the two conversations are parallel right now. They really are, because Milano had his ups and downs. He had his red flags with the injury stuff, and he has shown that in the right situation, everybody can be happy here. So if Tremaine's going to play ball and do something like that, in the 12s and 13s, then I think Brandon Beane is more than happy to abide. But if we start talking about the CJ Mosley, Roquan Smith stuff with him, you know where this is headed.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And, looking back at last year's draft, did the Bills maybe make a mistake in the third round when they addressed linebacker, but they took a Terrell Bernard, who isn't necessarily a Tremaine Edmunds type of replacement? Or is this something where if Edmunds leaves in free agency, the Bills could either find a bargain in free agency or just be able to replace him via draft? Obviously not necessarily the same production, but find someone that could fill in that role.
Yeah, probably both. We're seeing a good number of off-ball linebackers hit the market because there are just certain teams in the league who aren't doing that top of the market thing, and I would probably put the Bills in that conversation. You can probably get something with your mid-round picks or a comp pick that at least holds you over for the next few seasons, and you can supplement that with an AJ Klein type player, which the Bills have been known to do in the past. Those guys are hitting the market quite a bit. Look, there's some big dogs too, right? TJ Edwards coming out of Philadelphia here had basically an Edmunds type year where it was, he was a nobody, then he started to, come into contention a little bit. And then all of a sudden he's one of the main focal points of a Super Bowl team. So I think those kind of players will hit the open market. And, if the jockeying is 18 million down to 14 million, maybe the Bills, consider themselves finding value in a player like that that's less expensive than Edmunds, but could have the same kind of production.
We're joined right now by Mike Ginnitti from Spotrac.com. Head over there, Spotrac.com. Get all of your free agency, salary cap, scratch the itch, because I know everybody's trying to figure out what they're going to do. Tell people a little bit while we're in between topics here about the premium options, because I was messing around a little bit with that today, and it's pretty fun stuff.
Yeah, well, the big thing is that it takes away the ads, which I know are the worst. So that's step number one. But then you get a bunch of tools, right? First, you get the historical information, so you can go back and look at Bills caps for the past 10 years or so, and all the old contracts for all the players. That unlocks all of that stuff. But then we've got some portal tools where you can mix stats with the money and do some dirty spreadsheet work and stuff like that. And this is all the sports. You're not just unlocking just the NFL stuff. It's all the sports that we offer, which is now expanded into F1 and live golf, and pretty soon some of this more auto racing stuff as well. We are not short on sleep over here. Let's put it that way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And for those watching too, hit that like button on YouTube. We really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel as well. Head over to valuehomecenters.com right now. You can join their text program. All you have to do is text VALU to 80692. You'll start saving even more. Receive exclusive coupons, see their weekly deals, and so much more. All right, Mike, I want to ask you about some potential contract extensions. Taron Johnson, he scored a new deal, I think 18 months ago ish now. I can't remember the exact, maybe it was even 2 years ago. There's probably a few contracts on the books. I think DaQuon Jones is really interesting. He signed a 2-year deal. He's going into the last year of his deal. What do you think about those two guys in terms of what it could look like, from a restructure perspective for those contracts versus maybe giving them additional years? And is it possible to bring down that cap hit this year? And is that something you think Brandon Beane might like to do?
Yeah, I've had a few people throw back Taron Johnson as a cut candidate for me. I'm not even close to there with him. I'm with you on this. I think it's more likely that they take that $9.2 million and convert it into a new contract. And because you haven't restructured this thing, you did have an option bonus. So essentially there's a restructure built into the current contract, but his value is only going to increase, especially with Tre'Davious' situation, maybe being more inconsistent. You're young now with a lot of those cornerback spots, and your safety, literally your whole safety program is about to get flipped over in the next 12 to 18 months. So you're going to have to lock some pieces in so that you make sure you're not just going young everywhere, because we've seen quite a bit how that doesn't work. So look, if he's an $8 million player now, and I think he's about the same player he's been, maybe a little bit more experience, but that's about it. Approaching 27 years old, he's the right time to throw a 4-year contract at him again and get this thing all over again. So, it probably bumps up to the 11s or 12s because the cornerback market, even the slot / off cornerback player like this is in the 12 to 15 range, where everybody else, CB1, CB2 probably sits in the 22, 25 coming up here soon. But that's nothing. When you're talking about an average salary, 20 million guaranteed total, that's about what we're talking about for Taron Johnson. And he's a lock for me for 2023.
What about DaQuon Jones, real quick, Ryan, before you get, is there something you could do long-term with him? Because he was as valuable as anybody in that D-line.
Yeah, he made a lot of the other depth guys look real bad, didn't he? This was supposed to be like the simple one and done contract that Brandon Beane's become real popular for, where it looks like 2 years, except for you look at the second year and you realize there's no chance, right? That's not sticking. This one might stick, and it might turn into a 3-year extension. We're seeing a lot of 3 at 10s for defensive tackles of his age, of his talent. So maybe 3 for 30 is probably about right. Maybe that gets adjusted up to 12 or 13 now with the back-to-back salary cap booms. But a player of his earth with 70% of the snaps, who's not going to light up the production, right? It's not going to be something that jumps off the page, but you obviously following the team, what kind of value he has. That's going to be more than enough to get that thing done if you guarantee 60% of that thing up front, 2 years. But that's a contract that was supposed to be real simple that got complicated for sure.
What does that do to the if they do extend it out? What does that do to this year's salary cap hit, which I think is somewhere around 8-ish?
Yeah. So you can make most of that a signing bonus, which is the real beauty of extending a restructure like that. So you take that almost $7 million salary, make it all a signing bonus, and bring him on the $1.2 million base salary minimum, and then you're talking about basically $2 to $3 million saved right now, fully guaranteed at maybe like $9 million cap hit next year, which is super tenable if it jumps up to 240, which I think it will, and then we go from there. I think it's probably the right move, especially with the void year built in there already, guys. Mm-hmm. You extend that, you keep those void dead caps intact, and you just keep going for it after that.
Love it.
Jordan Poyer, obviously someone that the Bills Mafia has grown to love, someone that's been extremely productive since the Bills brought him aboard at the start of the Sean McDermott era. He doesn't know what the future holds. He's gone on record saying, that he doesn't know where he stands with the Bills. But you look at this year's free agent class, it's pretty deep at safety. And you have an older veteran who's been dealing with injuries this past season, quite a few of them at that. Is he as good as gone, or could this be a situation where he hits the market and maybe he's not getting the money he thought he would get and he could return to the Bills?
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm playing this. If I'm in that front office right now, I have a number. I know what the number is, if it's 11 or 12 a year, if it's 24 guaranteed or 28 guaranteed, whatever it is. I have a number and I've already given it to him. And I'm saying, you can pack your bags, whatever you need to do. When March 13th comes and you can start talking to other teams, if you start getting inundated with numbers that are way past that, then, we'll be putting out a big thank you note to you, from the organization. and really, it's just business. It has nothing to do with any kind of hard feelings or anything. But I think it's as simple as, here's the numbers. We're not going to budge. We know where we have to be right now. We hope you get more because you're worth it. You know what I mean? But we got to be here right now. And I think in Milano's case, that's exactly what happened. Is he went out there, maybe he got $2-3 million more per year offers, but at the end of the day, he wanted to be here. So it was worth it to shave off a few. That's the only hope I think Bills fans should have with Jordan Poyer, that he's willing to shave a few million off, guaranteed and per year, to come back to this organization, which he knows he has success in.
Is there a conversation that you want to have less this offseason than the Jordan Poyer one? I can't imagine how many times you've been asked this question.
Oh, no. Are you kidding me? The Lamar Jackson one is just...
Oh, yeah.
Lamar and Aaron Rodgers are half a decade that I want my life back from. It's just, it's an annual daily thing now. And by the way, somehow I'm still interested by it, right? Like, I'm still like, oh, what's Lamar going to do now? Or what does that mean? Or what is Aaron Rodgers' darkness chamber going to mean when, for his $60 million? I'm sucked in. So I'm all in on this stuff.
That's awesome. All right, I got one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan for anything that he has left. If the Bills pull like all the levers that they can, right, and just from a conservative standpoint, Brandon Beane does all of the smart things that we've kind of talked about over the course of the show. Any of the things that we maybe didn't. First of all, what does that look like in terms of what they can create cap space wise before free agency in your eyes?
I think they want to get themselves about 25 million of space to work with for free agency. And then, as things pop up and you need more, you can always, react on the fly. But to me, because that's 45 essentially that we're freeing up here, right? That's quite a bit. But, Miller and Allen do most of that work right there. So I think that's probably where you start. I don't think you'd restructure recklessly, and Brandon Beane's shown he won't. So I think you're doing 3 or 4 things. Maybe it's 2 cuts, 2 restructures, get yourself to about there, and then let things play out a little bit.
And then if they take one swing, even if it's like a second level contract, like, and you could put your fan hat on here, you could put your, cap hat on here. And from a smart team building perspective, what do you think the swing is based on the value of the contracts on the free agent market and what the Bills need?
I'm not a hot take guy, but I'm doing this.
I love it.
I'm packaging a pick with Gabe Davis from Mike Evans.
Ooh, we talked a little bit about Mike Evans. Yeah.
Yep. I think Tampa could use the cap relief, obviously, which Gabe would offer them and give them a body to work with Chris Godwin. And I just think Mike Evans on an expiring contract is super tasty, right? Especially coming to a team that will know how to utilize him. We'll have a quarterback who can get him downfield a little bit. It's a big option in the red zone, which we need. I just like every angle of this. And if you got to pay him, $28 million a year next year, then I guess that's the price to pay. But I just love everything about the 2023 situation with that maneuver.
And what does that look like contract wise? It looks like there's some dead money in the next couple of years. How much of that did the Bucs take on? And what does that look like from what the Bills are getting back dollars wise?
Yeah. So he's a $14.5 million player. There's $14.5 million cash. Everything else stays with Tampa. So it's not a ton of savings for them from this contract, but that's cash they don't want to pay. And when you talk about Gabe at about 2, you're talking about a big change from 14.5 down to 2 for a player that, should at least give you 80% production based on what we've seen from Gabe over the past 3 seasons.
Yeah, and that would definitely get the Bills Mafia talking if something like that went down. Now, again, it's kind of a follow-up to what Matt asked. Is there a free agent on the market that you think is a near perfect fit for this roster in terms of what the Bills are trying to do and what could be one of their missing pieces?
Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders has been my guy since the middle of 2022. I know he's got the injury stuff. What running back doesn't, right? What running back doesn't? He's not as old as you think he is. He's got that window where you can get him in for 2 years. You can pay him about 7 or 8. Maybe the Bills get him in for cheaper because of who they are. So we're talking 2 for 15-ish, around there, maybe close to fully guaranteed. That's the weapon that this team is missing right now. The absolute up the middle. No bones about it. Yes, you can catch some balls, but we got other guys that can do that now. The absolute experienced and now postseason experienced Miles Sanders type player who can play in this kind of weather. There's some connections with some other players on Pitt on this roster currently. I just think it's the right guy for the right spot right now on this team.
Well, you were the right guy for the right interview at the right time of the offseason. Mike Ginnitti, Spotrac.com. Thank you so much. One more shout out for where everybody can find your content here over the next couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, at Spotrac on Twitter. Spotrac.com is the website. We've got the Spotrac podcast twice a week. Appreciate you guys.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Mike.
Mike Ginnitti, thank you so much. Take care, buddy. Ryan, let's hang out for a minute here. Some odds and ends. Reports are that I want to cover this before we get. I don't know when our next show will be. That the Bills. There's multiple reports out there, so I guess we could kind of cover our bases here. But the Bills, obviously, Chad Hall. We talked about this move last week. Moving on to Jacksonville. Tom Pelissero of NFL Network is reporting that the Bills are hiring veteran wide receiver coach Adam Henry. Per a source, Henry coached LSU back. We'll talk about who he coached there. Has been with 5 NFL teams, most recently with the Cleveland Browns, the New York Giants. Coached Odell Beckham Jr., which I think is a very interesting piece of all of this. First thoughts on this potential signing, but I think it was Mike Fisher from down in Dallas that said he was hearing that the I's aren't dotted and the T's aren't crossed quite yet. But if this ends up being the case, and this gives the Bills a lane to Odell Beckham Jr. on maybe a 1-year, really affordable contract, I think this is a win-win-win here for the Bills if that ends up being the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that the hiring in general would be a very good hiring. I was watching a video of Jarvis Landry, and it's when he joined the Browns and he met up with the coach and talked about how important he was to his development at LSU. This is someone that has a track record of bringing wide receivers along. It would just be overall a good replacement for Chad Hall, a beloved wide receiver coach. You're bringing in a proven entity, someone that's done it at the college level, at the pro level, and has some connections to a guy like Odell Beckham Jr., who, like you said, for months, Bills fans and many other fan bases were on like an OBJ watch. And now, he is going to sign somewhere this offseason. That would give the Bills maybe a leg up in that competition as well at a value price, you would hope.
Yeah, if you want a value price, get over to Tops Friendly Market, hit up the Carryout Cafe. They got you covered for game day, tailgating spreads, or whatever kind of party you are hosting. Hot to go fresh large cheese and pepperoni pizzas, $14. The jumbo chicken wing 10 count, $14. The Tops legendary breakfast pizza. Get yourself a large, $20. Pizza or taco log, 6 count, $7.69. Baby back rib sections, $5.99 a pound. Subs, sandwiches, wraps, apps, sides, and so much more. Visit topsmarkets.com/redzone for the complete menu of ready-to-enjoy fan favorites. All right, what we got here, Ryan? We got a week and a half until the NFL scouting combine. I'll be heading down to Indianapolis on Monday early. We get things probably started on that Tuesday with Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott and much more as the player interviews start on Wednesday. We're going to start transitioning to the draft. We're going to have a ton of content over the next week as we start to prime you up for free agency. I wanted to have this conversation with Mike Ginnitti before we really dive into some of these different moves that the Bills can make. So I'm going to have a piece on that here in the next couple of days. It's going to be fun, Ryan.
Yeah, going to be a great time in Bills Mafia. If you are subscribed to our newsletter, it is going to start coming out next week on Thursday. That way you will get the newest episode of Shout when the newsletter comes out the next morning, and it'll have all of that news that Matt just said we're going to be cranking out here over the next few weeks and months.
That is a great job. Ryan curates that every week, kills it each and every time on anything he does. Podcast, article, newsletter. He can do it all. He's even got some really good wing takes. They're not all great, honestly. Like sometimes you have a wing take that I'm just like blah, but for the most part, you bring it. And stay tuned for our next live event at Wingnuts. We want to see more of you guys out there. It's going to be so much fun. All right, for Ryan, I am Matt. We will see you next week. Have a great weekend as we kind of get ready, get ramped up for some draft stuff, some free agency stuff. It's going to be fun. Take care, everybody.